Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of PDP's The Dairy Signal. It's Tuesday, July 15, and we've got a really important topic to talk about when it comes to those calves. We're going to be discussing Salmonella Dublin today, and we've got a lot of important information to share with everyone. Before we dive into that topic, I want to give everybody who's listening and viewing or listening to the recording a couple of updates about the facelift that our Dairy Signal platform has undergone recently. And so there's really two things that I want to talk about. If you are wanting to ask a question, you're tuning in to the live presentation and a question comes to mind, you can ask a question by looking down in the bottom right corner of your screen. You should see three dots at the bottom there of the video screen. Click that and you'll see a place there to ask a question. Pretty straightforward. Then you can just fill in type in your question. It'll ask you for a name, but you don't have to submit your name if you don't want to. We'll ask the question anyway. So that's point number one. The second point I want to address, if you're here to capture some continuing education credits, whether for the session we're going to be presenting today, then after this episode, a quiz will auto-populate. You'll want to answer the questions to the quiz, and then make sure you submit the questions you've answered all the way. You might have to click submit 2 times, so make sure you check that out. If, on the other hand, you're coming back here to capture some continuing education credits for an episode you listened to previously or on a different day, then you're going to want to move your eyeballs to the upper left corner of the screen, and you'll see 3 lines. We call that a hamburger. And so you want to click those 3 lines, and it'll give you the options that you need to be able to access those continuing education credits. We'll make sure you get credit for the episodes you've watched. And of course, that one will be affiliated with a quiz also. Just make sure you're submitting your questions and clicking submit questions or submit quiz as many times as it asks you to, and you'll be set. And now we're going to turn a corner and dive into our session after I give a hearty thank you to our sponsor for this episode, and they are Dairy Management Incorporated. We know them as DMI, and they're our checkoff group, and they are hard at work using your checkoff dollars to promote our wholesome and nutritious product that we call milk. So let me just tell you one of the many, many things that they do. This is a fun fact I'll share with you. Nearly half of all fluid milk sales are comprised of whole milk sales. There was a time when the focus was on skim milk or 2%, but that is not the case any longer. Whole milk now comprises nearly 50% of all fluid milk sales. And I'm going to read a little bit here. So this strong track record speaks volumes about the Dairy Checkoff sponsored full fate dairy nutrition research and consumers' renewed enthusiasm for whole milk. Want to learn more? Visit dairycheckoff.com and you'll discover a little more about how they're making every drop count. Thank you, DMI, for once again sponsoring an episode of the Dairy Signal. We can't do this without help from sponsors like you. Thank you. And now let's turn it over to our topic presenters for today. Again, we'll be discussing Salmonella Dublin, and I want to present to you our 2 presenters. They are both coming at us today from Pennsylvania State University. We have with us Dr. Melissa Cantor and Dr. Erica Gonda. They're assistant professors there at Pennsylvania State University. Ladies, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'd like for you to each briefly just tell us who you are, where you came from, or why you have landed in the place where you're at today. Take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the introduction. You go. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Cantor. I've done a couple of these webinars in the past. I really do anything you could imagine related to replacement heifers and surplus dairy calves. So those would be the animals that are paying a lot of our cash books right now. The surplus calves are worth a ton of money. And I'm here with Dr. Gonda, who I give full credit to because she is truly a specialist in Salmonella Dublin. She does a lot of really cool stuff on the lab side, and I'm really excited to present this to you guys today. Do you want to add anything with your intro, Dr. Gonda?
No, I have my intro built in.
Oh, yeah.
Myself.
Okay, fair. All right, so really what we're going to talk about today, we're going to overview the status of Salmonella Dublin in the United States. We're going to talk about what this disease looks like clinically when we're looking at animals, some of the limitations of diagnostics, what are some of the prevention strategies we can do, and even some of the really, really cool stuff that Dr. Gonda's lab's doing in the future directions. So just as a pop quiz, I want you all to think to yourselves, what were you taught about Salmonella Dublin? So when you were a kid and you were in school or whenever you were in class, did you ever hear about this? And I want you to be thinking about why. So some of you might be familiar with Typhoid Mary, where she really is the most harmless and yet the most dangerous woman in America, right? And I want you all to be thinking about our lactating cow that may be a carrier of Salmonella Dublin. She might not let us know that she's clinical, but she still is carrying and shedding this pathogen in her environment because she really can be the most harmless yet the most dangerous cow in your herd, especially when we think about our young animals and our replacement stock. So this is a beautiful image here of what Salmonella Dublin is all about. Dr. Gonda has an amazing cookie cutter she made from her 3D printer of Salmonella Dublin. And what exactly is it? So essentially, Salmonella enterica is subspecies, right? This Dublin is a subspecies of that. And it's a gram-negative bacterium that can cause a whole lot of havoc, not only just for our calves, and to a lesser extent our cows, but also us. So Salmonella Dublin is often spread through the manure, and this infected manure can get transferred to humans, especially those who are immunocompromised. It can get transferred to our calves because, again, they don't have that full immunocompetence yet, right? They're not quite ready to defend with acquired immunity as they are when they're older. And it can also spread to calves through unpasteurized colostrum and raw milk. So again, subclinical carriers are a problem because they contribute to the herd having Salmonella Dublin. And there really is that zoonotic potential, which can cause us problems if we're drinking raw milk, which is why we don't advertise to do that. And again, it can come and look at many different faucets as we show here, right? Whether that's a naive person doing cow yoga for fun, or perhaps a scientist out there not familiar with cows. These people are a lot more susceptible because they're not necessarily exposed. And again, the way it's transmitted is through the fecal oral route, right? So essentially, just like crypto or other pathogens, it's coming to us through manure, and it is an occupational hazard for us as dairy farmers. And again, I've already mentioned that if you eat raw milk or even ground beef that's not properly cooked, you can get this. And you can see here that the likelihood of actually being infected with something with Salmonella subtype and bovine contact is quite high. So if you're actually physically touching cows that potentially are shedding this and you don't know they have it, you're 7 times more likely to actually become positive for this. And again, when we talk about zoonotic potential, something else to keep in mind is that as time progresses, Salmonella Dublin is really showing itself as this poster child of a One Health challenge. Again, we see that the number of classes of different isolates around is increasing with time. When you think about even back when I was in high school, just to date myself. So Salmonella Dublin really is that poster child that I was talking about. And so, again, this is a problem because when we think about things like antibiotic resistance, this can be a challenge. We think about, as you can see here, these are going to be cow-associated pathogen isolates through the browser, right? And as you see through time, look at how much it's increasing. And this is some work that Sophia has done in Dr. Gonda's lab. And you can see this is even increasing for humans as well, right? So there is this relationship here between, as we see it increasing in cows, to a lesser extent, but still an extent, we're seeing this increasing in humans. And this can be a real challenge because, as you can see here, Dublin, there's 437 different isolates that have been isolated from this particular guy. So what does this all mean? Essentially, what this means is that Salmonella Dublin used to be this rare thing we heard about once in a while back in the early 2000s. And now a lot of labs are seeing this as the most common thing that they're isolating from clinical cases of bovine. So again, it's becoming something that's really, really almost flying under the radar until it becomes a major problem, right? And then the farm is very unfortunately familiar with it. And to make it even more complicated, this pathogen is great when it comes to, not great in a positive way, but it's very good at antibiotic resistance, unfortunately. So you can see here that S. Dublin, Salmonella Dublin there is the white. It has nearly 100%. I don't like to always say 100%, but this graph really does look like that these isolates of Salmonella Dublin class are actually resistant. This is a huge problem when we're thinking about, this is coming from, again, cattle in Minnesota. This is an issue. If we have a really bad disease that's attacking our calves, getting them really sick, our tools at our disposal are extremely limited. So prevention, and control are super important. And you can see here that this is highlighted here in the Salmonella Dublin. When we actually look at classes of antibiotics, or antimicrobials, as we like to call them to be politically correct for the veterinarians attending this webinar, you can see that the resistance to sulfa is quite high. The resistance to neomycin is right around 60%. Fluorphenicol, that's a huge concern, right? If for those of you that aren't familiar with these classes, that would be our new fluor for respiratory disease. Look at that. If you're treating a calf that's presenting clinical signs of respiratory disease, and it happens to be Salmonella Dublin, 85-ish% of those are going to be resistant. That's a huge issue. And same thing with ceftiofor when we're thinking about, sticking things under the ear for calves for respiratory, our ampicillins. This is a huge problem. And that's why Dr. Gonda has so much work to do for this pathogen. Because again, it's just a real issue. And you can see that dairy operations in general are often the ones that are identified as having multi-drug resistance with these compared to something like a beef operation, suggesting that this is a real challenge for us as we move forward. And here's some more evidence, right? So if you weren't convinced yet, I always have one vet that's like, I need more data. Okay, here's your data. It's quite clear that we have some that are resistant to as many as 7 different classes of antimicrobials. That's insane, right? So again, I think we've all convinced you that this is a One Health challenge that we have to deal with that has major economic impacts that are going to affect our farm. What do those look like? Well, some of this is going to come from those clinical consequences of infection. So for lactating cows, we're going to see things like drops in milk production. We're going to see deaths, especially in our young calves. Dr. Gonda will talk about mortality rate. It's a little bit of a bleak slide there. Abortions, especially in our late-term cows, that are those cows that are in our late trimester, those are going to be really costly. Treatment costs, of course, culling, milk losses, etc., right? And of course, management. It is really also a challenge because we have to figure out who's going to buy these animals, right? If we're going to cull cows that are shedding this, who wants to purchase them? And that becomes another challenge too. This is, of course, in euros. And again, this is a little bit of an older statistic, but we don't have an updated one. It's costing per cow stall in the first year, at least in this European study, anywhere from €49 to €300. Given the cost of inflation, I would suggest this number is much, much higher. Actually, I could put money behind that. But unfortunately, this is the most recent pub we have on that. So again, we know that this is also a risk for multiple sectors too, right? It's not just our farm. It's not just the dairy workers and us. It's all sorts of facets of different parts, right? We produce a product, we produce milk. Obviously, we're pasteurizing that to help break that barrier. But again, there's just lots of different places that this can end up. So it's an important thing to care about. And of course, we know that Salmonella Dublin is really great at attacking our cow host. And unfortunately, it is kind of hard to diagnose because there's so many other things that look like that in terms of clinical signs. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It's also invasive, and in particular with our young calves, anywhere from 2 to 12 weeks of age, it's going to be associated with pretty high mortality rates as well. And it's limited to treatment options too, as we talked about before, because it's resistant to many classes of antibiotics, and that can be a challenge. It can also be a challenge if we think about the food production cycle too. If we think about food safety, that's why, if you're a herd that is selling raw milk and you're licensed to do that, you have to regularly test for this pathogen. It is no joke. It is very easily transmitted through those products. And again, human health and welfare as well, right? Because we want to make sure that we're controlling something like Salmonella Dublin on our farm if we're dealing with it, because of the zoonotic potential as well, not just our farm. So again, if we're accidentally using something it's resistant to, so I told you, Salmonella Dublin can present like respiratory disease in calves. And if we're using something like Nuflor, you saw the percent of isolates that are resistant to that is quite high. And so this can be another challenge because it's impacting everybody. So again, how do I know the prevalence of my herd per se? How do I know if this is something that I'm dealing with, or if I have a couple suspect animals, what are we doing? Of course, I have to give the disclaimer, work with your veterinarian as always. So this is not supposed to be veterinary advice again. This is our interest for you. We're presenting this to you as a scientific info. But the best and most sensitive way to identify how much of a problem Salmonella Dublin is in your herd is to do not only just a bulk tank milk ELISA test, but taking blood samples on young animals. So ideally, you're doing so on these animals that are around 4 to 6 months of age. If you do that on all your animals in that age range, you're going to have 99 out of 100 samples that it says are sick or shedding this, I should say, or have this resistance to it, which means they've been exposed. Those animals are going to be real. So again, you can see there's some other tests that we can do. We can culture, but look at that. Culture, especially through feces, is not very reliable. And this is with animals that are showing us signs that they might be shedding the pathogen, right? So again, blood is a much better way to test for this than if we were to look through feces. And we're going to talk about that more in detail in the vet section. So what does this disease look like? I hope that I've kind of hinted at it a little bit, and I know I'm running through this kind of fast too because we have a lot of slides. But Salmonella in calves is going to look like respiratory disease, and it is respiratory disease, of course. So this is going to affect a calf as young as 1 week of age, but could go all the way up to 8 months. Typically, we see lots of infections in calves right around weaning simply because they're already undergoing a stress factor. Something that's a real clue if you're dealing with potentially this disease is a high fever. Particularly if you're sending your heifers off to a heifer raiser and bringing them back within a time frame before they're 8 months of age, they could potentially be exposed to Salmonella Dublin. So keep that in mind. A closed herd is a huge, 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 huge benefit to keeping this out of your herd if you currently don't have it. So that's a huge thing. The other thing that's unfortunate about Salmonella Dublin is it can progress to systemic infection very, very quickly. Unfortunately, it's quite adapted to the host, which is this baby little calf here. And this can cause endotoxemia and, of course, really, really intensive acute respiratory disease that attacks the entire lobe in a very quick fashion, which is why we see high mortality, right? If we don't have any lung space available to aerate and to breathe, we unfortunately aren't going to make it. And outbreaks can often happen in these critical periods where we might be commingling calves. So again, if we think about when we're individually housing and we're putting all our calves together right after weaning, they're already undergoing the stress of removing milk, adjusting to a new barn, a new diet. This is oftentimes putting risk factors up to make this calf even more susceptible to Dublin than she normally would be. The other unfortunate thing is the good calves, or AKA the survivors, are they good? Because unfortunately, the calves that do survive from this crisis are going to be shedding this intermittently in the environment. What do I mean by that? I mean that these calves, when you take a blood sample, they're going to be intermittently shedding it, which is why feces is such an unreliable test, right? Because sometimes they're going to be shedding Salmonella Dublin, sometimes they're not. That's why blood samples are so much better, because they're going to tell you, hey, this calf was exposed to Salmonella Dublin, and you know that she could potentially be a carrier or a shedder later. Oops, got it this way. So what does it look like? This was a farm that was generous enough to let me borrow these photos. Again, Salmonella Dublin looks like unthrifty calves, right? You know when you're dealing with Salmonella Dublin because it doesn't let things go unnoticed. You're going to see really high mortality rates related to respiratory disease. You're going to see extreme signs. So what do I mean by that? When we're thinking about the Wisconsin scoring or even the UC Davis scoring system, we're going to see a lot of cloudy nasal discharge on these animals. We often see a very dramatic ear droop. Now, I know things like Mycoplasma bovis can also present very similar signs, but one of the key differences between those two in my eyes is the timeline. Mycoplasma bovis is another respiratory pathogen that lacks a cell wall, which also makes it difficult to treat. But what makes that pathogen different is the slow, very general progression of the calf going downhill. With Salmonella Dublin, it can happen very, very fast. We're talking within 24 hours to 48 hours, you have suddenly a lot of calves coughing, a lot of calves with ear droops. You're going to have stiffness a lot of times in the back legs. Again, this is, it's often characterized as something called lameness or things like that. But what I've noticed is that stiffness in general, they're just not as flexible as they normally would be. Again, because of that toxemia it's causing. And you're going to see calves mobilizing fat off of that back rib end area right in front of the pelvis. That is probably something, this disease is so calorically intensive that it's incredible. You'll have a calf looking wonderful and great, and then you'll be like, what happened? I went away for 3 days, I came home, and now she looks like this. How is this a thing? It's a quite aggressive disease. So apologies for the grossness, but I thought it was important to also present some examples courtesy of the British Veterinary Medical Association and SciFlow Brazil. But you can see a calf that dies from something like Salmonella Dublin. It can be quite invasive. So for those of you that aren't familiar, most respiratory pathogens are going to colonize a specific lobe. This pathogen is going to colonize multiple lobes. You can see here on the top left there, that dark red screen. If you see that really dark red color there, that's dead tissue. There is no ability to aerate in that calf's lungs. If you see on the right-hand side, there's a lot of lymphatic fluid, and it's very obvious. You'll see this yellow fluid surrounding the heart and the lung tissue on the calf, as shown in A. The spleen will be very thick. It'll be fibrous. You will be able to poke it and feel that there's a lot of immune activity going on. In C, you can see here, this is a completely compromised lung lobe, right? There's absolutely no air being aerated in this calf at all. I wouldn't be surprised if this calf just dropped dead from Salmonella, given how little air this calf was getting at its death, unfortunately. And this on D is a cross-section of the lung to show you that there's a lot of swelling and edema that happens. You can see that basically the lung tissue has completely expanded, and there you can see here that there's just all sorts of efforts in the immune system to combat this, but with unfortunate success. And so, again, it's no surprise based on the images I just showed you that the lung is probably where most of these lesions are going to be presenting themselves. As specific as we go up with number of cases, you can see here that there's more and more lung. So again, if you're taking postmortem samples on a calf that you suspect might have died from Salmonella Dublin, the lung surrounding not only healthy tissue, but also the necrotic dead tissue is a really good sample to take. Obviously, the liver is always really important too, and you can see some cases will present positive for Salmonella Dublin in the liver, and less so in some of these other organs. And so again, I want to remind everyone, now that I've scared you all about Salmonella Dublin, that it's really important we're identifying this not only in the young stock, but also in a bull tank milk ELISA as well. We want to know, is this in the lactating herd, or is this simply an isolated situation that came from buying animals from auction? Did it come from potentially heifer raiser or things like that? If you're trying to figure out where this bug got into your farm, this is a very important thing to do, to not forget about the lactating herd. Because again, they're not going to show you the dramatic signs that your young calves will. So again, I think it's important too to identify where this bug is making its bed, unfortunately, right? So Again, it's important still to test those pre-weaning calves, make sure that you're not dealing with raw milk contamination. Post-wean calves are almost always, unfortunately, the ones that are showing you there's a problem, right? And some of those older calves as well, to see, did calves get exposed and recover and they're still shedding later? In order to stop this bug in its tracks, you really need to know how wide is the age gap in terms of herd that's infected. And so if we're dealing with pre-wean calves that are coming up positive, either through mortalities, which more than likely, yes, and also positive blood samples, we're going to be asking, how is manure getting into this pre-weaning area? Are we using a shared skid steer? Are we feeding raw milk that we're not pasteurizing to our young calves? More often than not, it's going to be the raw colostrum, meaning raw. When I say raw, that means unpasteurized colostrum, right? As a potential source, because again, it's so easy to accidentally curdle that colostrum in those calves. And it's really important to check and test transition cows in the bulk tank too. You want to make sure that your animals undergoing stress aren't shedding this in their environment, particularly in the maternity pen, right?
Dr. Erica?
Yes.
We have a question that came in some time ago, and I didn't interrupt your flow, but back when we were talking about the best ways to test for Salmonella Dublin in calves, and you talked about how blood tests are the best. We have a question here from Stephen. I'm not sure that I understand his question. So, Stephen, if I don't ask this the right way, then please let us know here in the questions. His question, should this be serum or plasma samples?
It will work in either. We usually do serum, but it'll work in either. And the best test is blood test, but this test still not all that great because
Okay.
who is going to be wrangling all their 3 to 6 month old to bleed everybody's? It's like in paper it looks great, but in reality it's challenging.
Fair. Thank you for qualifying that. Okay. Thank you, Stephen, for your question. And I turn it back to you.
Sounds good. Yeah. So again, work with your vet to determine how many animals to test and which to test, because as Dr. Ghana highlighted, this is a test that has a very limited sensitivity in terms of individual animals. And and again, if you're trying to figure out your prevalence, you're willing to test everyone. Some of the larger herds are, but if you're a smaller to medium-sized farm, you may not be able to do that. So again, work with your vet to figure out which animals to sample and how many. Again, of course, the gold standard would be, unfortunately, to cull some of these animals that look very clinical, because again, these are animals that are probably not going, you saw the lungs of the ones that don't survive, right? We know that lung consolidation at weaning is associated with 1,200 pounds less of milk in the first lactation. And that's for a regular old case of pneumonia. Now we're talking about a very invasive disease. So again, these animals are probably not going to be your best winners, but I'm realistic that sometimes farms have an outbreak and they can't necessarily cull everyone, right? So this is where working with your veterinarian is going to be very, very important to figure out what to do. In a perfect world, if you have the space, not all farms do, you would find a way to isolate those healthy, positive calves if possible and follow up testing on those animals to see if they're still shedding this in the environment or not. And so again, sanitation is your best way to mitigate this. And I want to kind of hurry up because I want Ganda to have time to present her stuff. Again, it's really important that we're drying out the surface before new calves. The good news is Dublin is easy to kill. So pretty much any sanitizing agent is going to kill this. The key here is removing manure. So again, the skid steer is on the slide because in my opinion, most farms forget about the skid steer. If you're dealing with a Salmonella Dublin outbreak, you've got to clean the skid steer bucket out, especially after, so that you're not bringing this over to the lactating herd or bringing it from the lactating herd to the calves, which is the most common thing I see. And chlorine dioxide is my recommendation here because, again, it is so great at killing everything. It even kills crypto. So again, if we're going to do this, we should do it right if we're going to be sanitizing pens. But I'm realistic that chlorine dioxide is extremely expensive, and things like Furcon and other sanitizing agents work great against Dublin.
But remember, you can't sanitize what it's not clean. So removing that manure is really, really important.
Absolutely. Yeah, manure is your biggest battle. That's why I have and again, if you're dealing with a Dublin outbreak, you should also have people I would love for everyone to sanitize boots in between heifer barns anyway, because that is an easy way to spread it. But again, it's fundamental in this environment, absolutely fundamental. So I might
you don't need to rush. Keep going because this is more important. And like I can shorten my stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So Salmonella Dublin in cows, they can get diarrhea from this. And in some cases, you may see septicemia. In heifers, you might actually witness some reproduction challenges, but more importantly, they're going to be shedding this in the environment. That's a huge thing to keep in mind. So keeping that manure from our older heifers separate from our younger calves is going to be very, very key. And again, cows are going to shed this in not only milk, but also feces. And again, it's common with environmental or physiologic stressors. Abortion is also an issue. I think I mentioned this earlier. And unfortunately, it's one of the few things that can actually transmission in utero. And so calves can be born infected with this in really, really bad situations in cases where we're dealing with a real problem. So just as a summary, disease in calves is going to be non-classical salmonellosis, meaning that we're going to see pneumonia more often than diarrhea in our calves, and progression to systemic infection is going to be marked by that endotoxemia and respiratory disease and really high mortality rates. I think it's like 20 to 100% of calves, right? Yeah, it's quite high. Whereas in cows, a lot of times it's going to be a lot more, I would like to say, subclinical in the fact that you may not even know that the cows have it, right? Think typhoid Mary with the cows. And so, this is really important. So again, risk factors are, I brought this up many, many times, but purchasing animals and bringing them in or letting your animals leave and come back are huge risk factors because again, you can't control what you don't see. And again, the high stocking density, that's just putting more pressure and giving more places for Salmonella Dublin to thrive. And I know with our heifers, a lot of times, that's the barn that we don't have necessarily the resources to invest in to put it in at the perfect stocking density, et cetera. So keep that in mind. Maternity pen hygiene, I think, is so important for basically every pathogen for calves that causes either diarrhea or Salmonella Dublin, right? I mean, this is just so fundamental. Getting manure away from those really young, newborn, susceptible animals and these stressed out lactating cows that just gave birth is fundamental to avoid exposure. And there's some other cases like showing cows and things that can also expose your animals. And remember, stress during calving can lead to shedding. So again, this provides more risk the longer that calf is in that pen with that cow. So just like many other pathogens out there, it's really important to get those calves away from the cow as soon as you can and to have this beautiful, clean environment like these two pictures here.
So I want to highlight this because it's going to come back in later slides. So the Danish have a national eradication program for Salmonella Dublin, and they came up with this risk assessment tool that you can go and download this spreadsheet on your own based on this link. But we transformed that into an app that I'm going to show later on. But basically what you do is you're going to walk around your farm and answer a bunch of questions, and there will be risk points associated to each of the answers that you have, and that helps you find where are the hot spots of problems in your herd that you could be get the best bang for your buck in terms of I'm going to make something different to be able to decrease the transmission of this.
You want me to cover this? So Salmonella Dublin diagnostics for the field vet. So again, I think I've mentioned this a couple times. A really high fever, again over 103.5, 104. Again, the best thing that you can do for these animals is get them bled and get this tested, right? So getting that overnight shipped to a lab is really important. Again, there's lots of different things we can do once the animal unfortunately dies. We can test different organs. I recommend for sure the lung and liver, as you're going to get more positive results there and higher sensitivity than some of these others. But of course, the lymph nodes and spleens are also appropriate depending on how many things you're testing. And then what about poop? Hopefully we've made it clear to you in this webinar that fecal samples, we already know that the sensitivity of the blood, what is the sensitivity of serology on one calf? It's not very high.
95 for one calf.
Yes, for one calf. And so again, fecal is going to be way lower than that. 15 to 30 something percent. It's not reliable. We don't recommend it. I still see this in the field all the time, and I'm constantly being like, no, not poop, bleed. Even though it's easier for the farm staff to collect that.
And there are lots of like bacterial explanations of why that's the case. If you want to make sure that your herd is free of Salmonella Dublin, the easiest way you could do that is do serology of bulk tank milk. But if you do only one sample, you can only have about 38% sensitivity. But if you collect over the course of 5 to 12 months, repeated bulk tank samples and you're always negative, then you can be 95% like sensitivity that your herd is free. And just to really bring down the point is depending on how you test your herd, you're going to have different sensitivity levels. The test that we have only one ELISA. It's not the best, but it's the only tool we have. And the biggest thing with trying to find for herd prevalence, so let's say you have a farm that has a Salmonella Dublin problem. You want to do a seek and destroy type approach. Where is this bug hiding? How can I improve my cleaning and sanitation methods to be able to decrease the transmission? And one of the big problems is that if you go and you start swabbing around your maternity pen and other places, unless your farm is teeming with Salmonella Dublin, you're not going to find that. Like to be able to go and try to grow the bacteria out, it's really poor sensitivity. We are playing around with some methods in the lab to try to improve that, but it is really not the best way of getting this. To get it from a dead calf, really easy, but trying to find it and use that type of information for prevention is really hard. So now I'm going to take over and try to put some perspective into what do we know about Salmonella Dublin in the Northeast. There's not a lot of research on this. So in 2018, this paper got published from New York State, where they sampled, again, 38% sensitivity, one bulk tank from each farm in New York, and they found 46 positive farms. And that is what caught my attention in terms of the research. I was like, well, if it's in New York, like we share a border in Pennsylvania, what's going on? What do we know about data from other states in the Northeast? And the reality is like not a lot. So I compiled what I could find in terms of Salmonella Dublin research available. And I found a manuscript from 2020 that was looking at whole genome sequencing of Salmonella Dublin isolates that had been collected from humans and cattle. And what they found is that the isolate from the ground beef was very closely related to the isolates that were collected from humans, and that they were heavily antibiotic resistant. So in this resistance was mainly plasmid mediated. A plasmid is a little bit of DNA. The bacteria can swap between themselves, like little kids swap baseball cards. So that makes it extra challenging to deal with because they can give each other the resistance to all these antibiotics. And I decided to put this data here because it brings it really clearly the point on how we are facing this challenge in North America. So I'm showing you a world map right now, and I'm going to show you like a bacteria family tree. So things that are close together are very related, things that are far apart are different, and they're color-coded by the continent where they came from. So here, looking at our bacteria family tree, you can see that the yellow or the North American isolates are all really right next to each other. And then you have the European ones to the bottom and some of the South American ones. But what I want you to see on this bit here is if you have a dark color, that means it's present, and a light color is absent. And the plasmid that I was mentioned before, that little baseball card of antibiotic resistance the bacteria can shed, is present in most of the North American isolates and not really in the others. And this is just a profile of the different antibiotic resistant genes that are, again, present in most of the North American isolates and not really to the others. But we've known that this been around. So the National Animal Health Monitoring System, the most recent dairy one we have is from 2014. They did test farms and they used some of their surveys to try to tease out what is the prevalence of this, what are the biggest risk factors. And what we saw is this used to be a very Western disease. So 52% of the herds in the West that were tested were positive for this. And then 4.4% of the Midwestern herds and 0.6% of the Eastern herds. But this disease has been slowly moving east. And as we see the farms getting larger, 40% of the large herds tested positive for this. So as you have acquisition of animals, joining of herds, you have increased likelihood of finding this. And the thing is, it is not a new problem. So I found this manuscript from 1999, which was describing some 35 outbreaks that happened between 1988 and 1995 on the border between New York and Pennsylvania. And what they said is caution to clinicians and microbiologists presented with suspected animals, because most cases occur in older calves, which is atypical for salmonellosis in this region. Calves are usually 8 weeks or older, and presents with pneumonia and septicemia. So just like Dr. Cantor was mentioning, it is a very atypical, it is a very invasive disease, it's very aggressive. So we've known about this. It's been around since 1988, and it's kind of like flying under the radar for several reasons. Because you try to treat it with antibiotic, it doesn't die. So you're like, oh, it's probably not a bacteria. The tests that we have are not the best. And all the things that we do regularly in dairy, such as purchasing animals and things like that, are big risk factors. So regarding of that, I'm just going to breeze really quickly about what my lab is trying to do in terms of Salmonella Dublin in the Northeast. So Dr. Cantor is the boots on the ground. We work with real world, and I'm the lab rat that sits and tries to play around with some data. So we work on animal microbiomes and One Health, and that's my background that I said was built in. I was trained as a veterinarian in Brazil. Then I did some research in the University of Florida and then Cornell University, and I started my lab here at Penn State since 2019. And the way I look at my research is from the concept of One Health. So most veterinarians are used to this concept is when you're thinking about health, a healthy animal, a healthy you need to have healthy food, a healthy environment, healthy air. But the way I look at this world is the bacteria and the microbes that flow through these different systems are really what is causing the One Health. And with the growing population, we don't have any more farmland showing up. We have more people to feed. So we have a big challenge. And that's where the goal for my laboratory and my research is to develop microbiome-based solutions, which is studying these bacteria that flow through the different areas for use in agriculture industry. So you might find lots of professors that are very specialists. They know everything about that one thing. I like to talk about our group more of like a generalist, where we learn from what's going on in the dairy industry, what's going on in the poultry industry, and try to get learnings from different areas to improve animal health. And this is just a shout out for all the fantastic group in my lab, because I don't do anything. I just beg for money and fight bureaucracy, and they are the ones that actually get the work done. And I want to give a shout out to the Penn State Microbiome Center as well, because it's been a fantastic group to work with at Penn State. So here in the lab, the main interests that we have are food production, antimicrobial resistance, alternative to antibiotics, zoonotic diseases, and public health. And as Dr. Cantor was mentioning, we started working on Salmonella Dublin, and we got a little grant, and I started putting flyers out. And I had a farmer call me and say, Erica, this thing got on my farm last summer, and 46% of my calves died within a month. And this can go up to 100% mortality. So we started working with different farms. As I was mentioning, it's really hard. You know the thing is there at the farm, killing the cows, killing the calves, but you try to swab and grow it out of the places where it should be, and it's really, really hard. So that's something that we're actively working on, trying to come up with better methods to be able to find it. Another thing that I was really excited to share, because this is brand new. So remember that spreadsheet and that radar chart of risk that I was talking about? So Grazielli is a very talented student in my lab, and she has taken that scanning that spreadsheet and transformed it into an app. So if you have your phone, you can scan it. We are alpha testing. And here I have a little demonstration of what the app is. So we have a session, we are alpha testing and we value your input. Please give me all the feedback you have. And you just walk around your farm and answer these questions. How many cows do you have on your maternity pen? How often do you clean the manure? How is your hospital pen managed? We also have a section on Salmonella Dublin and risk factors. How does this disease? So pretty much everything that Dr. Cantor and I told you is there at your fingertips. And you can also look at your previous assessments. So you can check yourself and benchmark yourself against your own questions. Here are some screenshots of the app. So if you're looking at the About Salmonella Dublin, you can go and educate yourself or show to a farm partner. This is a screenshot of what the risk assessment of the maternity pen would look like. And this is how a radar chart would look like. So if you have a very high peak on 1.1, that means you have too many cows in the maternity pen. So it's a very easy management change that you can make to be able to improve your management. And just reminding you, this is the very first time this thing comes out. I'm very excited. Please scan it, and we're looking for feedback. We want this to be a useful tool for the producer, for the extension personnel, for the veterinarians. And then I'm just going to give you a couple of more minutes to scan this if you're interested. And then really quickly, what do we know about Dublin cattle in the United States? So what we did is we went and got all the publicly available data from the National Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring System. Basically, they grow bacteria, test against antibiotics, and push it to this big database. And we can go there and take this infrastructure to be able to understand what is going on across the country. So what you're seeing here is the darker the color, the more bacteria have been isolated and sequenced from that area. So you see lots from the West and the Midwest. Lots of problems. It depends on how much money or who is sequencing or what have you, but it's present. And the darker color here are bacteria that have been isolated and sequenced that came from a sick cow. The blue color is the bacteria that had come isolated and sequenced from a human, and the teal color is a food-associated environment. So we're talking about milk, cheese, slaughterhouse samples, and things like that. And we have a very different distribution depending on where you're at. And here is another way of seeing this. We see an increase of both clinical bovine and clinical human and environmental, like food-associated isolates. But this is not because it's necessarily, oh, we're getting so much more Salmonella Dublin. We're getting better technologies, better surveillance. So we're getting better at finding the thing that has been flying under the radar since 1988, basically.
Better awareness.
Yes. So this is another way of looking at this. Again, you have a clinical bovine, a clinical human, and environmental isolate, and then you have the colored bars that mean they have that gene that confers resistance to that specific antibiotic. And you can see much more color on the clinical bovine ones, meaning they are not going to die with the regular drugs that you're going to treat. The same way I had shown you that bacteria family tree, this is another way of looking at it. And what we can see is everybody is mixed together. You don't really see like a dark blue or a dark purple color. And I'm going to end at, we try to compare the genome. So like the 5 million letters in the genomes of those bacteria. And we try to compare each pair. When you look at the food associated, we found 729 pairs of bacteria that had been sequenced that had exactly 0 differences between them. 166 bacteria that had been isolated from clinical humans that had 0 differences, and 80 from clinical bovines that had 0 differences. But the really One Health and this flow of microbes and why this is such an important zoonotic pathogen comes here. We saw 77 pairs of bacteria where a bacteria isolated from a slaughterhouse, for example, was identical to the bacteria isolated from a sick human. 18 from clinical bovines and clinical humans. Again, that is your occupational hazard. If you're dealing with a sick calf, you have the chance to be infected with this. But this is at 0 differences. This is a very stringent cutoff. The CDC's cutoff is usually 20. And when you look at 20, everything is connected to everything. In fact, 72% of the 2,000 plus bacteria genomes we looked were considered closely related. And with that, I'd like to acknowledge all of my fantastic colleagues, our funding sources. I have a couple of concluding remarks. Salmonella Dublin is a challenge for bovine operations. It's an insidious disease. It flies under the radar for several reasons. It's highly antibiotic resistant. The tests that we have are not that great. When the test is great, the implementation of that specific testing procedure is pretty much impossible and has severe economic impact. We still have lots of knowledge gaps in terms of how widespread is this in the northeastern US, what kinds of diagnostic methods we can improve. And for take-home messages, we need to increase awareness when it comes to Salmonella Dublin. This is a non-traditional disease presentation. It's very antibiotic resistant. The testing methods are not great, so we have underdiagnosis. Management is key. As you saw, we're not that successful at treating it once we have it. So prevention is the most effective way of trying to manage this. So having closed herds, testing animals that you're going to purchase, cleaning and sanitation procedures, those are all your keys to success when it comes to Salmonella Dublin. And then future ideas that we're currently working on are better diagnostic methods, testing strategies, and spread mitigation efforts like that app that I just showed you. And with that, I'd like to thank my wonderful lab, Dr. Cantor, for the invite, and for you and your attention. Thank you.
Wow, what a lot of information you ladies have presented to us. I'm thankful, Dr. Ganda, that you closed giving us some steps that we can take because this is a disease clearly that after listening to 60 minutes of the two of you talk about it, we could either leave feeling terrified and absolutely immobilized. We don't even know where to start, but I'm thankful that you summarized it. Sounds to me like the keys are prevention, prevention, prevention. Cleaning and sanitation protocols are fundamental. And Dr. Cantor, you said it early on, you got to work with your veterinarian on these things.
Absolutely.
And I found it interesting that I believe it was you, Dr. Melissa, who said, fortunately, Salmonella Dublin is easy to kill. So we need to keep our premises clean, our equipment clean, love the concepts about, you know what, from heifer barn to heifer barn, just be careful. Don't be spreading the manure.
Exactly. And if you've got people visiting your farm, I know it's so easy to not wash your boots.
Biosecurity.
Biosecurity. It becomes really, I know, we've got HPAI that we were worrying about too, but this particular disease is oftentimes brought in from either an animal that's already carrying and then shedding it, or manure, contaminated manure. And what an easy way to protect your herd if you just buy some boot covers for kid tours or things like that. Those little steps, our farm, my poor dairy herd here at the university, they've gone through so many boot covers because I'm so stringent about biosecurity. We are currently Salmonella Dublin negative. We give 45 tours a year to thousands of people. So if we can do it, you can do it too. It just takes a lot of effort.
And there are some silver linings when it comes to Salmonella Dublin. It is a very invasive pathogen, right? You will kill your calf. If it gets on a person, it's going to go to the bloodstream really easily, but it is not that infectious. So what that means is it can be on your herd, but if your herd is well managed, your biosecurity is good, and your animal health is good, it's not going to cause you problems. It is a opportunistic pathogen. So whenever you have a break-in management, a heat stress event, or something like that, that's when you start seeing the problems. It is really easy to kill with sanitation and biosecurity practices. Everybody wants to get the silver bullet and that drug that's going to fix everything. No, it's always the basics. Like if you get the basics, and you have good management, that's usually how you keep your herd healthy.
Colostrum management too.
Exactly. And like so many very like simple things that can be done to be able to manage the disease. But if it's in
Excellent.
your calf and it's killing your calf, then it's not that easy to kill the bacteria with drugs. So you want to kill it in the sanitation part.
And the great thing about once we master these basic principles, prevention, cleaning, and sanitation, we're going to be conquering a whole lot more than just Salmonella
Exactly.
Dublin.
Yeah,
It all
especially for
comes
calves.
down to keep things clean and sanitized. That's how we raise healthy animals. That's how we produce a healthy product that is safe for human consumption and also helps our consumers to feel confident that we are producing for them a wholesome, nutritious product.
Yeah.
Excellent information. And Dr. Ganda, I want to correct you. You proclaimed yourself as somebody who doesn't do anything. You only beg for money. And I have a feeling that though you have a wonderful laboratory staff, I'm pretty sure you do your fair share of work there as well. So
Probably.
hats off to you for looking for what are those solutions going to be for us, because clearly we need them. So stop telling everybody that you're not doing anything.
Yeah, I would echo that because Dr. Ganda was absolutely fundamental in putting together these slides. She doesn't give herself enough credit.
I imagine that's the case. Thanks for also putting that app together. I think that's going to catch the attention of a lot of people, particularly with their input. You did give an opportunity to pause at the QR code. I would also say to anybody who wants to listen to the recording, if you scroll to,
I just put
thank
it
you,
back up.
Dr. Nanda. Yeah, and I was going to also mention that when watching the recorded version of this episode, it was right around the 45-minute mark that Dr. Ganda was talking about this. So if you're wanting to review this with your team in a lunch and learn, or just review it again for your own personal education, that 45-minute mark is about where you'll find the original mention of the app and the development and the importance of having more users try it, because that's how we make anything better, right? Feedback and input.
Exactly. And we're trying to adapt something that is quite like 10, 15 years old, this spreadsheet with lots of wording that is not quite appropriate to US standards. So Dr. Cantor took the app, went to our dairy, and wrote us an email that was page and a half long. I was like, you need to change this, you need to add that. So like we're looking for that because we want it to be useful for people.
Yeah, takes teamwork. Okay, what a fascinating episode. Dr. Melissa, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to add?
Nope. I guess my only closing remark is, if you do end up with Salmonella Dublin, all is not lost. But if you're willing to invest in testing all of your young stock 6 months and younger, it's going to pay off in the long run because it'll really tell you how much of the iceberg is actually being seen, right? And how many animals are kind of shedding that. I know that it's going to be a big bill that jumps out at you, but that's my takeaway message is it's worth the investment in the long run to get a handle on it. There are farms out there who have successfully gotten past that, some of which actually I just talked to one of them a couple days ago, and they got past it and everything's good. It actually came down to two things: a heifer raiser and a break-in management for the colostrum with a new employee. So again, there is hope, but you have to be willing to invest to get past that hurdle.
Well, and what's not very expensive in the face of Salmonella Dublin is disposable boots.
Yeah,
A
completely
little
agree.
inconvenient, maybe, but not as inconvenient as culling way too many calves. And so buy some boots and make sure that all your employees change them from
Yeah.
barn to barn. How easy is it to go about your work on a farm? I grew up on a farm, And I didn't change my boots when I went from the milking barn to the calf barn.
Yeah.
But we should be doing that.
It's a battle, and even if you can put out some of those sanitizing mats so people can step on them when they come in the door, and
Yeah.
put one person in charge, maybe of changing those regularly. Those little things really do make a difference, even if they feel obnoxious. You'll hear a lot of griping at first, but if you practice that culture, I mean, my whole lab now, they've all griped about it when they first started because many of them grew up on farms, and now they all just regularly do it because it's one less thing to contribute.
And it's a mindset change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our
Okay.
lab is more than happy to work with farmers. If you have this challenge or you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We still have this project ongoing. We might be able to do some testing. So just reach out to us.
Excellent. Maybe we can flash up one last time for you ladies, your names and titles or email addresses if you have that. Otherwise, of course, we at PDP have their information as well.
Thank you. Yours on.
I have mine on the last one, but
Which is
normally it's
That's okay. You're the one that does the testing.
And like I said, we'll have that information here on our PDP team as well.
there you go. So there's my information.
Excellent. Great information.
This was fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And listeners, we want you to feel empowered and equipped with new tools, not terrified. There are many things within your control here, and a lot of you are already doing many things right. So congratulate yourself on the things you're doing well and adopt some of these new tools and practices that you could be doing a little bit better. Thank you again for joining with us today on this Tuesday episode of the Dairy Signal. And I am signing out for today. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.